This is, I think, a difference as well between the first generation and the second generation. Something I've spoken about with people privately is the difference between the first generation and the second generation. Like if we look at our parents and what they did when they came to this country, the sacrifice they made, our parents, our grandparents, the sacrifice they made, they set up the infrastructure so that we can then benefit from that and reap the fruits of their labor.
Yes.
And that's their contribution to our community.
For example, like the masjids.
Yeah, great example. So for example, the masjids, that whole infrastructure has been set up by the first generation.
This video is sponsored by Chai Pani Blackburn, the hottest place to get your carrot chai in South Asian street foods. Open from early and closes late means you'll never miss out on all your favorite foods. With a great indoor seating area with friendly staff at your service to a large shared car park with a drive-through style attendant taking your order so you don't have to leave the comfort of your vehicle. It's a perfect spot to meet and catch up with friends, so make sure you head down to Chai Pani Blackburn in partnership with Braincell².
Now the question is with the second generation, our generation, is that what's our contribution going to be for our community?
So whether
and for our deen?
Is it maintaining what they started? Is it starting something else?
What is that contribution? Because it seems that all we seem to be doing is that we've got caught up in the rat race.
I was just going to say the same. Yeah.
We've got caught up in the rat race, and our priority is Plege, Lamak, Beardwood. That's our priority.
Yeah.
What's our contribution to our community? What's our contribution to the deen? So that's something that we, the second generation in particular, need to reflect on. That when we ask that question, it's a provocative question, what's our contribution? Because the first generation, we clearly can speak about their contribution. Why is it that we can't answer that question? What is our contribution to our community and to the deen? We can't even answer that question.
Thinking about it, it's true. What have we done in the past 20 plus years?
I'm just thinking about myself. Right? I'm just thinking about myself right now.
Of course.
And if I put myself into the words of what you have just said, Sheikh, what's my contribution to my community, apart from all of this kind of stuff? What is my contribution to my community?
It's a heavy thing to hold over, yeah.
It's very heavy, isn't it? When we think of it like that, it's a...
Because there's a documentary out where a brother in Bradford, when he first moved from Pakistan to the UK, he moved to Bradford, I think, or whatever, or Rochdale, I think. He was the first man to build a masjid in either Rochdale or Bradford, I'm not sure. Because Muslims were coming home, but there was nowhere to pray. So he was the first one that built the mosque in the community. So he was like a cornerstone of the first generation that came over.
Yeah.
They started something.
I feel like the new generation, the next generation, whether you're second or you're third, the next generation from the generation that's built these infrastructures within our communities, for them people, for us, what our one thing, it could be anything, you've got any other points, fair enough, but the one thing that we should try and aim for is maintaining what they've built. I'm going to stick with the masjids. You might have different examples as well, but with the masjids, for example, if the youngsters get involved in the masjid, I'm speaking to myself first as well, if the youngsters get into looking after the masjids, even something as simple as we should go and clean up the masjid every now and then, go into the masjid. I'm not going to get into the whole committee thing, but you speak to the imam, is there anything that I need to do? Lights changing, this, that, whatever, something. build that foundation, build a connection with your local masjid. And if enough of us do that, that's maintenance. And we're holding strong to what they've built for us. What Allah has allowed our parents to build for us in our communities, we're reaping the benefits, like you said. But what we're going to do, just take the benefits and not do anything?
So maintenance is important, but along with maintenance, there's another problem. And that problem is replication. So what we're doing is, so there's already like 50 masajid or so in Blackburn. Yeah. So what we're doing is, sometimes obviously when you go into a new area, it might become necessary to build another masjid. That's understandable. That's absolutely fine. But what we seem to be doing is replicating what the first generation did.
Yeah.
So there's just replication. So we just copy and we just replicate it. Whether that replication is necessary or not, we don't even ask that question. We just replicate things. So if there's a madrasa, we just build another madrasa. Whether it's bringing benefit or not, we don't even question that.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, we just replicate. And we don't consider what the needs are of the community today. Because the needs of the community at the time of first generation were different from the needs of today.
Yeah.
And that is not being appreciated by our generation. That we're not thinking about the changing needs of the community, and therefore we're not catering for their needs.
Yeah.
That's fundamentally the problem with our generation.
Without naming any names.
Of course.
And any street names and stuff.
Of course.
There's a masjid. Big main road. Yeah. And you probably know what I'm talking about already. But there's a masjid. Big main road. There's a masjid there. I'd say not even 200 meters. There's another one being built. Bigger and more grander. And now I've always questioned this, because I've always thought to myself, there's masjids around Blackburn, Accrington, Burnley, Preston, wherever. Roofs are falling down and they're having to scrape for money and asking on every Jummah, spare some money, you know, lilla, and we can get the roof done or this and that. I remember someone, I was at Jummah once, and a mosque, one of the people from a mosque from a different town came to our mosque saying that, look, we don't have no money, and the mosque that I was at had money, and they came to that mosque and they asked and why I say the roof, because I can remember this, and he said, look, our roof is leaking really badly and it's going to cost us like 50 grand to get, you know, the masjid is big and it's going to cost quite a lot. However much it was, whatever you can spare, fair enough. Why do we need to build another masjid 200 meters down the road, when if you can take a portion, let's say that masjid is going to cost 2 million to build, you can save yourself that 2 million, take 500 grand out and distribute. If you really are passionate about getting that hasanat, getting that reward of building a masjid, distribute that. And somehow, however, the logistics you can sort out, but distribute that money around to the masjids that need fixing up, or into the youth centres or the Islamic youth centres and stuff like that. There's no need to build another masjid, because it becomes a rival. That's what I'm seeing it as.
So we engage in replication, and you've just given an example of replication there. And many a time, this replication takes place because fundamentally our intentions are correct.
Yeah.
That's what it ultimately comes down to.
I'm just going to say to you, is it because of the ego and all that stuff?
So we have to reflect, each and every one of us has to reflect on our spiritual state. That when we do a good deed, whether that deed is an individual deed or whether that deed is a deed for the community, a collective deed, at every stage we have to reflect on our intention. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? Because if one's intention is sound, then one keeps the gharad, the purpose in mind. If your intention is sound, you keep the gharad and the purpose in mind. When your intention isn't sound, then it doesn't matter whether you're fulfilling a purpose or not.
Yeah.
So that's a sign that your intentions aren't correct. when we don't think about the purpose of what you're doing.
Right.
So what's the purpose of building another masjid when there's countless other needs that the community has that are being overlooked?
I mean, I just said one need, but yeah, like you said, there's so many other needs that need, and everything costs money nowadays.
Of course.
Everything costs money.
Yeah.
What you said there, Sheikh, brings to me straight. Is it the story of the people of Ad or Thamud? They were building grand, carving out of the caves and the mountains, to show off, and they weren't even living there. And it's crazy how that 5, 6, 7, however many thousand years ago, still happening today, but now it's happening with the Muslims. Because I'm not here to judge anyone's intention, but
Yeah, it's Quran mentions it, وَتَنْحِتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا. They used to carve out houses from the mountains.
Allah knew His creation. That's the thing.
yeah, communities, I think, what's another point about communities that we need to understand, especially when it comes to our parents within communities?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, care of parents is a very pertinent subject, especially for our generation. And why it's pertinent for our subject is because we are at crossroads. And we are at crossroads between Western values and Eastern values. That's the crossroads we are. Because all of us, to some extent or another, is westernized. Yet, at the same time, because of our background and where our parents and grandparents came from, are also have a foot in the East. And if you were to generalize about Western culture in contrast to Eastern culture, then what Western culture prides itself by is its individualism.
Okay.
The individual matters most.
Yeah.
That's so true.
And that's something that a person in the West who has no connection with the East, no background in the East like us, will even admit that individualism is something
100%.
that they pride themselves by.
100%.
So it's not something that's derogatory per se. It's something that practically everyone will acknowledge, that individualism is what they pride themselves by. Whereas in the East, what you see is collectivism. Generally speaking, collectivist culture is dominant in the East, and that's the history of the East. Obviously, because of westernization and globalization, that's changing by all means, and we acknowledge that. But if we look at the history, then Eastern culture is generally collectivist and Western culture is individualist.
An example of each? So
like when it comes to family,
okay.
do we find that connection with extended family in the West in the same way that you find in the East?
Not at all.
Why? Because the East is about collectivist culture,
Yeah.
the West is about individualist culture.
so true.
So that's a good example
And
to
sorry to cut you-
demonstrate that
yeah.
difference.
Sorry to cut you off, but you see that in your own family members as well.
Of course.
Like when my parents talk about being back home, they didn't talk about brother and sister and mum and dad. They spoke about aunties, uncles, brothers,
Neighbours.
Yeah, all together as a community. Here we don't have that, unfortunately now.
It's true.
So what we have is both influences. We have Western influences because we've been born here and brought up here, but we also have Eastern influences, and that's our background. So now we have to somehow deal with that tension. There's a conflict within us. Within each of us, there's a conflict. And we have to try and find a synthesis now. So that may not look the same as it looked for our parents or grandparents, but we have to grapple with that.
Yeah.
Of how do we make sense of that tension that exists between individualist culture and collectivist culture.
Yeah.
Because as it stands, we're just conforming more and more to the dominant culture.
Do you think that is good, that we as we are able to have a balance between the two, or do you think one we should be aiming to go towards one side, meaning the individualists or
Yeah, that's a really important question. So what we have to understand is, if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, have you studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs in school?
Never heard of it.
Why is it that my generation, like practically everyone, we studied like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in school?
I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you what it is. We didn't listen.
Okay. That's a different story. Fair enough. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that was just like in school all the time. It was like the case with geography as well. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah.
Okay.
So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. At the top of so there's 5 layers, and at the top of it was self-actualization.
Okay.
Actualizing oneself. That was at the top of of what we were taught in school. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we were taught in school, the height of the hierarchy of needs
was
self-actualization. However, what we find in later versions of Maslow, because Maslow then amended his hierarchy of needs towards the end of his life.
I was going to say, is Maslow still alive? He's not.
No.
Okay.
But Abraham Maslow, towards the end of his life, amended the hierarchy of needs and added an additional layer beyond self-actualization. And he said that was self-transcendence.
Okay.
So it's not about the self, rather there is a human need to transcend the self. To go beyond the self. To go beyond the self.
Okay,
So a human being cannot be happy by merely just looking after one's selfish needs.
True. Okay.
One has to go beyond the self and look after others, and that others may be fellow human beings, or it may be transcending makhluk and the creation and looking after the creator and transcending creation. But one has to go beyond themselves to be able to reach the pinnacle of fulfilling one's needs.
SubhanAllah. That's just reminded me, and this is amazing. I'm getting the hair standing up, because Allah talks about this in the Quran. I don't know the exact verses, but I've studied Surah Yusuf, and the father of Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was struggling, when Yusuf alayhi salam was taken away from him. And one of the ways that when I was looking into the tafsir of it, the ustad that I was learning of said that one of the ways that the father of Yusuf alayhi salam coped, not the only, but one of the ways, was by advising his sons, and that's one of the ways where he could help himself, where he was, because he was a prophet himself as well. So he was advising his sons as well around that time, which helped him. And that's exactly what you're talking about. So, and why my hairs are standing up is because everything that the modern world is discovering when it comes to theologic and all this kind of stuff, Allah, if we look into the Quran, it's all there for us.
Yeah. So what collectivist culture, going back to where we're discussing the difference between Eastern culture and Western culture, collectivist culture by definition includes selflessness. Individualist culture is about the self. So where's the selflessness?
Selfish.
In individualism? And that's the tension, because we can't reach the pinnacle of the hierarchy of needs, to use the framework of Maslow, without that selflessness. And therefore collectivist culture is integral for us to have community that is healthy and thriving. If we want community, then we need collectivist culture, and a human being can't work in the long term without community.
100%.
So therefore we need to focus on that selflessness, on nurturing that selflessness.
So you're saying that we need to bring back our Eastern values.
Absolutely. When it comes to community, the importance of community. Now there are some tensions in that. So let's start to interrogate that. Why is it that when it comes to community, we at times get put off? What is it about community that puts us off? Because we have to be honest.
I think
because if it's just easy, community is right, focusing on individual is wrong, then we would just go for community. Like, why is it that something stops us from doing community? So we have to interrogate that, because there's something not right there. So we have to interrogate that. So what stops us from doing community? What is it about community that puts us off? We have to be honest with ourselves, because that's part of the conversation.
If I'm talking about myself,
yes,
one of the reasons why I've been put off from the community is because gossip, and you know like when you're in the community and then you become a part of the community. That's one of the reasons I've slightly moved out of the community in terms of my living situation, because I don't want to be part of that everyone knows everyone's business, and it can be a good thing that everyone knows everyone's business, but it can also be a bad thing, and I've seen the bad thing of it. I've seen the bad side of it. So that's just, it's like PTSD almost. Like, I'm moving away. I don't want to deal with this.
So this is precisely the problem. I'm glad you've articulated that, because this is precisely the problem. That if we want to do community successfully, there's certain usul, there's certain principles, there's certain adab, there's certain etiquettes that we have to keep in mind for that community to work. And if we don't live up to that, then community breaks down and people become individualistic.
I think they've lost that now. You know, our generation.
Yes.
They've lost. I'm not saying everyone. You can't paint everyone with the same brush, but majority of our age people have just separated themselves from the community, because when they try something good towards the community, they don't get anything
They
back.
get shut down.
Yeah, and if you give something good, you're expecting something of someone.
Like basically, right? There's this. I won't go into detail, but there's this new case. We'll call it a case. New case. Someone that I know, they're battling. They're trying to say to their person of parents and in-laws that they're trying to give them the Islam side of everything, and the parents are just bringing out the culture side and the community side, and they're having a big clash at this very moment.
Yeah, so that clash between culture and a very letter of the law approach to Islam, that clash is something we're going to explore further, inshallah, as we go into the discussion about care for parents, because that will demonstrate through example how we can navigate that tension. But that definitely, there's a tension there, and it's not as simple as either or, because we as human beings live in a culture, and therefore culture has a role to play as well. Even in fiqh, like urf has a role to play, custom has a role to play, culture has a role to play. So you can't ignore culture. So there's this idea among some Muslims of our generation that we can ignore culture and just do Islam. Culture's bad, Islam's good. That's a very simplistic approach, because you can't ignore culture. We live in a culture. So custom, you can't ignore custom, you can't ignore culture. To what extent we allow culture, that's a matter of debate and discussion, and that's something we can explore as well further in the podcast through the example of looking after one's parents. But that's something that we as a community now need to grapple with, because the first generation, they understood culture.
Yeah.
The second generation is becoming very literalist and trying to make out that culture is a bad thing. There's a notion there in our generation that culture is bad, religion is good, without realizing that religion is not always against culture, and culture is also a consideration
they do go
when it
hand in
comes
hand
to
sometimes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think I fall into that category.
yes.
I do as
myself.
well. No, I'm not going to lie.
Feel like I do because when, for example, if in a family gathering, in my head, it's like if it's not against the Sunnah and the Quran, culture-wise, do it, whatever. That's my mentality, and sometimes I say in a bad tone towards certain people that I shouldn't. That makes them feel like I'm lecturing them or I'm putting them down. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, you're wrong.
Yeah. Like it's culture is culture, Islam is Islam, keep separate. You know, and I don't like. I know it's wrong.
Like that notion is quite dominant in our generation.
It's good that we've got someone here that can, because I struggle with that as well.
Absolutely.
I struggle with that as well.